by 2:30 the coach would come, and Eleanor Hartwell would still be the woman this town had decided to pity. She didn't know yet that a small slate and a nub of chalk would undo every word they'd said about her. The slate sat on her desk where it always sat, edged with a child's wobbling letters she had not yet wiped clean. Outside the window, the dust of Cedar Hollow's main street hung gold in the afternoon. Somewhere down that street, by supper, the women would say it again the way they said it every season, that the schoolteacher was a kind enough thing, plain and past her years, a spinster nobody had thought to marry. Eleanor heard it the way you hear a clock. You stop noticing the sound and only notice the time it keeps. She was 31 years old. She had taught in this dusty rail town for 6 years, and she had buried both her parents in the 8th and 9th, and somewhere in the keeping of other people's children, she had become a fixture, like the church bell or the dry goods sign. The town did not dislike her. That was the worst of it. They lowered their voices when she passed, the way you lower your voice near something that has been broken a long time. Adelia Crane, the banker's wife, lowered hers most of all. On the boardwalk that morning, Eleanor had passed 3 women clustered near the dry goods window, and Mrs. Crane had drawn her gloves smooth between her fingers, finger by finger, the way she always did before she said the unkind thing softly. "Poor Miss Hartwell," she had said, not quite under her breath. "She does so love the children. A pity she'll never have her own." Eleanor had kept walking. She had pressed her thumb against the small jet brooch at her throat, once, the way she did before any hard thing, and she had kept walking. She did not beg the town for anything, not for its pity, and not for its pardon. She set her own supper, and she ate it alone at a rented table with 1 chipped plate. And she did not weep about it, because weeping was a thing you did when you still expected the world to change its mind. She was wiping the slate clean when the schoolhouse door opened against the wind. A man stood in it, broad in the shoulders and weathered brown, holding his hat against his chest with both hands. Behind him, half hidden in his coat, were 2 children, a girl of 9 with 2 dark braids and a face shut like a door, a boy of 6 with sandy hair and a wet, red, crumpling face, his hand twisted in his father's sleeve. "Ma'am," the man said, "I'm told you're the teacher." "I am." Eleanor set the slate down. "Eleanor Hartwell." "Caleb Mercer." He turned the brim of the hat in a slow circle. "I've a place 6 miles out past the creek. These are mine, Sarah and Tom." He stopped. The boy hiccuped a sob into his coat. Their mother passed in the spring. 8 months now. The boy won't sleep and the girl won't talk, and I've run clean out of knowing what to do for them. It was the most a man like that would say to a stranger, and Eleanor understood it cost him. She came around the desk slowly, the way you cross a paddock toward a horse that has been frightened, and she crouched down low, level with the children, her gray skirt pooling in the chalk dust. "Hello, Sarah," she said to the girl who wouldn't talk. "Hello, Tom." The boy hid his face. Eleanor didn't reach for him. She picked the slate up off the desk instead, and the nub of chalk, and she set them on the floor between them all, and she drew a small lopsided cat with a crooked tail and said nothing at all. The boy peeked. After a moment, a small grubby finger reached out and turned the chalk toward himself, and on the slate, beside her cat, he drew a smaller one, the first thing either child had offered the world in 8 months. Eleanor pressed her thumb to her brooch and held very still, so as not to frighten it away. Caleb Mercer watched his son draw a cat on a spinster's slate, and something in the man's weathered face came loose. "What do I owe you," he said roughly, "for them to come to school?" $1 the term, Eleanor said, still watching the boy. "And you owe me nothing for this afternoon." They came on the Monday. Sarah Mercer sat in the back row and did not raise her hand, and did not say one word. And Eleanor did not make her. She gave the girl the slate to clean each afternoon, because a child who will not speak will sometimes work, and a child who works is a child you can wait for. Tom sat near the front and cried twice the first week, and once the second, and after that mostly did not, because Eleanor had learned that if she set him a small private task, fetch the chalk, ring the bell, count the primers, the crying had somewhere to go. Caleb Mercer came at the close of each day. He did not come into the room. He stood at the bottom of the steps with his hat in his hands and his hired wagon behind him, and Eleanor would walk the children down, and they would speak for a moment in the long gold light. He spoke the way he did everything, slowly, and only what was true. "She cleaned the slate twice today," Eleanor told him on the Thursday. "She does it very carefully. She lines the chalk up by size when she's done." Caleb looked at his silent daughter climbing into the wagon. "Her mother did that," he said. "Lined things up, spoons in the drawer, smallest to biggest." He turned the hat brim in his hands. "I'd forgot that till just now." The town had a habit when it saw a man and a woman speak twice in the same week, and Cedar Hollow indulged it now. By the second Sunday, Adelia Crane had drawn her gloves smooth on the church steps and observed, softly, to whoever stood near, that it was a curious arrangement, a widower and a spinster, and a person did wonder what a woman past her chances might be hoping to get. Eleanor heard it. She climbed the church steps with her spine straight and her thumb at her brooch, and she did not turn her head. But Hetty Boggs heard it too. Hetty kept the boarding house where Eleanor rented her one cold room, a wide, warm woman who wiped her hands on her apron, whether or not they were wet. That evening Hetty set a second bowl of stew at her own table without asking, and pushed it across to Eleanor. And she said the thing the way she said all things, plainly, and while drying a hand. "You listen to me, since you've sat alone at that little plate long enough?" Hetty wiped her hands on her apron. "Half this town would step over a body in the road sooner than carry it. That Mercer man drove 6 miles to put his grieving babies in the only hands he trusted. If you've sat with me this long, sit a while longer, because the part worth telling hasn't happened yet, and I mean to see it happen." She pushed the bread nearer. "Now eat. You've gone thin as a fence rail." Eleanor ate. It was the first supper she had not eaten alone in a long time, and she pressed her thumb to her brooch under the table where Hetty couldn't see, because some kindnesses are harder to bear than any cruelty. The first hard frost came in the last week of October, and with it the thing that nearly ended it before it began. Tom Mercer took a fever. Caleb came to the schoolhouse at noon instead of 3, white under his weathered brown, the boy limp and burning in his arms, because the town doctor had ridden out to a calving 2 days north and would not be back before Thursday. "He's hot as a stove lid," Caleb said, and for the first time the steadiness was gone clean out of his voice. "Mrs. Boggs said she said you'd nursed the Pruitt children through the same. She said you'd know." "I know." Eleanor was already pulling her shawl from the peg. "Take us to the ranch. It's warm there, and it's his own bed, and a sick child wants his own bed. She turned at the door to her startled rows of pupils. "Sarah, you'll come. I'll need your hands." And the silent girl, who had not spoken one word in the 8 months since her mother died, looked at her brother burning in their father's arms, and she said, small and cracked and rusty as an unused hinge, "Is Tom going to die like Mama?" The whole room went still. Caleb made a sound low in his chest. Eleanor crouched down level with the girl in the chalk-dusted doorway and took both her small, cold hands. "No," Eleanor said. She didn't say probably. She didn't say we'll see. She had learned long ago that a frightened child can carry the truth but cannot carry a lie. He has a fever, and fevers are frightening, and we are going to break it tonight, you and I, with cool cloths and willow bark tea and a great deal of patience. Your mother is gone, and that is the hardest true thing there is. But Tom is not going anywhere. Now I need you to be brave and carry the slate, because we are going to make him draw cats until he's well enough to be cross about it." Sarah Mercer picked up the slate and held it to her chest with both arms, and she nodded, and they all went out into the cold together. That night Eleanor Hartwell didn't sleep. She sat at a boy's bedside in a widower's house, and she wrung cloths in cool creek water and laid them on his small hot brow, and she dripped willow bark tea between his cracked lips, and when he thrashed and cried for his mother, she did not pretend to be his mother. She told him true small things in a low, steady voice, that the fire was warm, that his sister was near, that his pa was just there in the doorway, that she, Miss Hartwell, was not going anywhere until the morning. Caleb sat in the doorway the whole night with his hat in his hands and watched the woman the town pitied save what was left of his family, one cool cloth at a time. Near 3 in the morning he rose and made coffee on the stove and set a cup beside her without a word, the way you do a thing for someone when there are no words left clean enough. Their hands did not touch, but he stood near her in the lamplight a moment longer than he needed to, and Eleanor, wringing the cloth, was aware of him the way you are aware of warmth. The fever broke at dawn. Tom woke thin and cross, and asked, in a small hoarse voice, for the slate. Sarah handed it to him. He drew a cat. It was the worst cat Eleanor had ever seen, and she told him so. And he laughed, a real laugh, the first in that house in 8 months. And across the boy's bed, Caleb Mercer looked at Eleanor with his whole weathered face open, and said, very low, "I don't know what we'd have done. Any of us." He turned the hat in his hands. "I don't want to know." She should have gone home that morning. The fever was broke, and the children were mending, and there was no more reason for the spinster schoolteacher to be in the widowed rancher's house. But Sarah took her hand at the door and wouldn't let it go, and Tom called from his bed for her to stay till he was well, and Caleb stood holding his hat and said nothing, which from Caleb Mercer was the loudest thing of all. So she stayed the day, and then she stayed to set the supper, because there was no woman in that house to set it, and the 4 of them ate at one table in the lamplight, and Eleanor Hartwell did not eat alone. What grew after that grew the way everything good on the frontier grows, slowly, against the weather, with no fuss made of it. She came on the Saturdays now when school did not keep. She mended the children's coats, which no one had mended since the spring, the elbows worn clean through. She taught Sarah to set the bread to rise, and the girl, who spoke a little more each week, lined the loaves up smallest to biggest, the way her mother had. And Caleb stood in the doorway and watched and did not say it hurt him, because it had stopped hurting and started healing, which is a different thing the heart does with the same memory. Caleb mended what he could mend too. He fixed the schoolhouse step that had been loose 2 winters and the stovepipe that smoked. He never said why. He left a side of bacon on Hetty's porch with no note and a cord of split wood, because Hetty had set Eleanor a second bowl when no one else would, and a man like Caleb Mercer paid his debts in firewood and silence. Once, walking the children to the wagon in the blue evening, his hand and Eleanor's reached the same small chalk-dusted slate at the same moment, and he did not pull his hand away, and neither did she, and the slate stayed where it was between their 2 hands for the length of one held breath. The town noticed all of it. The town always noticed. Adelia Crane drew her gloves smooth at the dry goods counter and said to the merchant's wife, loud enough to carry, that some women would do a great deal of nursing and mending to land a man with land, and that it was a shame, really, how a desperate spinster could turn a poor widower's grief to her own account. It carried the way she meant it to. It reached the schoolhouse by way of a pupil's careless mouth, and it reached Eleanor on a gray afternoon while she wiped the slate clean, and for the first time in 6 years of being pitied, something in her bent. Not broke, bent. She set the slate down very carefully and pressed her thumb hard against the brooch at her throat, and she thought, with a cold, clear plainness, that perhaps the kindest thing she could do for that good man and his children was to step back, so the town would have nothing left to say against them. She decided to take the morning coach. She told herself it was for their sake. She packed her one trunk in the cold rented room, the slate laid on top, and she meant to be gone by 2:30 before her own resolve could fail her. But Hetty Boggs had a grandson who swept the schoolhouse, and the boy had ears, and by supper-time the news had gone the 6 miles out to the creek, the way bad news always travels faster than good. Caleb Mercer came into town that evening. He did not stand at the bottom of the steps with his hat in his hands. He came up them, 2 at a time, and he knocked at Hetty's door. And when Eleanor opened it, he stood there, bareheaded in the cold, with his hat crushed in one fist, and the 2 children behind him in the dark. And for a moment, the man who only ever said what was true could not find a single word. It was Sarah who spoke. The silent girl, talking freely now, stepped past her father and took Eleanor's 2 hands the way Eleanor had once taken hers, and she said, "Please don't go on the morning coach. We saved you the chair by the stove. Tom drew you a cat." She held up the slate, their slate now, carried all the 6 miles in. On it, in a child's careful hand, was a cat, and beside it 3 larger figures and 1 small one, all holding hands, and beneath them, spelled out in Sarah's painstaking letters, "Stay." Tom pushed forward and wrapped both arms around Eleanor's waist and would not let go. "Be our ma," he said, muffled, fierce. "You already are. You just don't live there yet." And Eleanor Hartwell, who had not wept when the town pitied her, and had not wept eating alone at her chipped plate for 6 long years, knelt down in Hetty Boggs's doorway, and wept then, with 2 motherless children in her arms. Caleb crouched down with them. He set his crushed hat aside in the dust of the threshold. He did not reach for grand words. He was not a man who had them. He took her hand, the whole of it, properly, the first time, and he turned it over in his rough one as if it were something he'd been carrying a long way to give back. "I'm no good at this," he said, low. "I'll likely never say it the way you'd write it on that slate. But I see you, Eleanor Hartwell. I saw you the first afternoon, down on the floor in the chalk dust drawing cats for a boy who wouldn't look at anybody. The town can call you what it likes. I call you the best thing that ever walked up my road." He turned her hand once in his. "Don't take the morning coach. Take my name instead. Take the chair by the stove. It's been waiting on you longer than any of us knew." Behind them, Hetty Boggs wiped her hands on her apron, hard, and pretended it was the wind in her eyes. Eleanor looked at the slate in Sarah's hands, at the 4 figures holding hands, and the one word beneath them, and she pressed her thumb a last time to the brooch at her throat, and then she let her hand go still in Caleb's, because there was nothing hard left to brace against. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll stay." They were married in the little Cedar Hollow church on the first clear Saturday of November, when the frost was on the Milo and the light came thin and gold through the plain glass. Eleanor wore her dove-gray wool with the jet brooch, because it was the good dress she had, and she had never in her life looked less like a woman to be pitied. Hetty Boggs sat in the front pew and wept openly, and did not pretend it was the wind. The town came, because a town that loves to talk loves a wedding even more, and Adelia Crane sat near the back, drawing her gloves smooth between her fingers, and finding, for once, that she had nothing at all to say. Sarah Mercer carried the flowers. Tom Mercer carried the ring on a strip of blue ribbon off his sister's braid, and dropped it once, and laughed. They did not go away anywhere. A ranch 6 miles out needed her, and a school in town needed her too, and Eleanor Mercer kept on teaching, because being a wife and a mother had never once meant she had to stop being the best teacher Cedar Hollow ever had. She rode in mornings on the wagon seat beside her husband, and the town that had pitied the spinster grew used to the sight of the schoolteacher arriving on a rancher's arm, 2 well-mended children waving from the back, and in time the town forgot it had ever pitied her at all, which is the only kind of apology a town like that knows how to make. The first snow came in December. On a still white evening, with the children asleep and the stove ticking warm, Eleanor sat in the chair by the fire, her chair, the one they'd saved her, and Caleb sat across, with his hat hung on its peg by the door, where a hat hangs in a house a man no longer has to ask to enter. The slate sat on the mantel between 2 carved wooden candlesticks, the way good china sits in another house. On it, never wiped clean, never to be wiped clean now, was a child's cat, and 4 figures holding hands, and 1 small one, and beneath them the word "a silent girl" had spelled the night everything turned. Stay. Sarah had said it once, low and cracked as a rusted hinge, "Is Tom going to die like Mama?" Eleanor had answered her with the truth, and the truth had held, the way she'd promised it would. Now the Milo stood frosted silver in the dark beyond the window, the same dry rustle she'd first heard 6 miles and a whole life ago, and the slate caught the firelight on the mantel, and Eleanor Mercer was not, by any word the town had ever owned, a woman anyone need pity again. That was tonight's story from the Hearth and Homestead. If it warmed you, pull your chair up again soon.